Owning a home is a dream of people all over the world, but it's an achievement that for many doesn't feel possible, especially when home prices will always go up. Oh, yes, well, oof, that financial crisis just came out of nowhere. I've got a whole new perspective with that head knock. If it feels like you can't afford a house because prices will always go up, believe it or not, it might not be like that forever. In fact, there are signs that housing prices will actually fall. Let's go through it. To the lab. First of all, let's acknowledge the moment in history when home prices fell when they never had before, Melbourne, Florida, in the United States. During the 1990s, Melbourne's home prices had a steady rise into the new century. Prices rose undeterred past the dot-com bubble in 2001 and gained momentum with the median home price doubling in just 5 years. And why wouldn't it? No matter what, you buy a house, in 10 years you always double your money. Well, look in Melbourne, Florida. It's doubled in 5. We need to stop here for a second and realise the cause of this rise. Why Melbourne house prices double the 5 years after 2002 when a move like that previously took 20 years? In December 2003, George W. Bush signed off the American Dream Down Payment Assistance Act, which intended to assist low-income earners in reaching the American dream of owning a home. This policy artificially raised demand for houses. Higher demand raises prices. Long story short though, like most government policies with a nice sounding name, it had the opposite effect. Loans were given to many who couldn't afford the repayments, a situation that heavily contributed to the great financial crisis of 2008. Many were forced to sell at a loss. More homes on the market means more supply. While demand was dropping, people were scared to own because they were scared to lose too. Higher supply, lower demand means lower prices. From its peaks in 2006, Melbourne's house prices on average fell around 50% by 2011. At the time, many Americans didn't realise, but do now, that home prices can actually fall, and fall heavily. But there is a place today in 2023 that has never seen a heavy decline in housing before. Home prices breezed past the great financial crisis, just like Melbourne did in 2001 with the dot-com bubble. So we are going to have to leave Florida on a journey to find this place. Okay, we're here. It's Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. For any of my American friends who are watching, this next section might trigger some GFC PTSD. Just a heads up. So Melbourne, Australia has seen substantial home price growth since the 1980s through to the 2020s, just like Canada and other parts of the world. So what was behind the significant price rise for Melbourne? There are many factors, including a decent economy, but a single policy arguably turned the motivation to buy real estate into a beast. It's the negative gearing policy. Negative gearing is a policy that can be found in other countries other than Australia. Not the same, but similar enough. So what is negative gearing? In Australia, if an investment property is running at a loss, the negative gearing policy allows property investors to claim the expenses and depreciation against the individual's tax income. But hang on a second, that discount is less than the loss by a fair bit. There you see, it would be better if no investment was made at all rather than invest in a property in Melbourne. So why do it? Because property prices always go up. Negative gearing allows for a reduction of overall loss while the house you own continues to climb in price. While the policy exists, it reduces the risk of investing in property. Unnaturally reducing risk will naturally cause higher demand. What do we know about higher demand? It creates higher prices. Now we know negative gearing only works with rising prices. It's actually a huge problem if prices fall. But because they didn't, the values of those investments started to multiply and people started making real money when rising rents over time meant they were now making profit. Here's the thing about negative gearing. Because it needs prices to go up considerably to be noticed, it acts like a sleeping giant. So although it was a policy introduced in the 1930s, high interest rates and inflation kept home prices from booming. The policy was paused in 1985, then reactivated again in 1987. The recession in 1991 kept home prices flat for years. The year 2000 would give another policy boost, paving the way for higher prices, which was the First Home Owners Grant and Home Buyer Scheme Act. What a mouthful. This policy had the intention of helping those struggling to get into the housing market by offering tens of thousands of dollars back on their purchase price. But in the long run, this increases demand. And what does higher demand mean? Higher prices. So, the giant would wake up. As well as the first homeowner boost being introduced during that time, which gave buyers $14,000 back on their purchase, again, higher demand, which raises price. Okay, so where did the momentum come from after 2008? China. China went on a global spending spree after 2009. And especially with their Belt and Road Initiative introduced in 2013. They had global projects, as well as building brand new cities at home in what felt like days. Construction was so fast that some cities were left vacant. What's that got to do with Australia? Australia supplies a lot of natural resources and commodities which China needed for their enormous construction and infrastructure projects. So Australia's economy was fueled by a booming China from 2010 onwards, which would have otherwise been a difficult period post the GFC. Then after that came record low mortgage rates. There are lots of reasons why Melbourne house prices will keep going up. They always have and always will. Wait, we've got a little bit to think about here. We need to be aware that generally speaking, a good investment will pay you enough to cover the investment's expenses. This will reduce the risk of selling if you don't want to. Sounds the opposite to negative gearing, doesn't it? Keep that in mind with Melbourne prices. But anyway, because buying a house in Melbourne, Australia will take years of the average person's income, people don't buy a house using all their savings. The house is being bought using a mortgage. It's the bank loan to pay for house and land itself, plus the interest of this loan over time. But now this is the part of the video where we lose those who have no interest in understanding their finances. Everything is fine, and knowing what you spend is boring. Let's wave goodbye as they continue on their own personal journey. I'm sure they'll be fine. The interest rate on the mortgage, otherwise known as the mortgage rate, is what I want to go over with you guys. Okay, so when we make our mortgage repayments, the portion we are paying back first is the interest, then the house and land, otherwise known as the principal. Remember too, if you want to check how much money you have made on the house you bought, don't only take into account the home value, but all the costs you spent, so you know what your break-even price is. But anyway, let's play a little bit of make-believe now. We are going to imagine that we purchased a house in Melbourne, Australia in 2018. We'll say we purchased the house for what was the average price for that year. Now we will work out what mortgage we have. On top of the house price purchase, buyers also need to pay a tax, as well as conveyancing, lender's insurance, and home and contents insurance. Now we have our mortgage. $694,000, and this is a 30-year loan. Quick note about Australian mortgages. You can't fix them for more than 10 years. And because trajectory of mortgage rates for 20 years was down, Australians generally don't fix their mortgages for more than 2 years, which is likely similar to all other countries outside of the United States. So we can keep that in mind for our make-believe Melbourne mortgage. Okay, so let's work out our monthly repayments now. Check out the link in the description to download a free mortgage calculator spreadsheet. Just input the mortgage information here, the length of the mortgage here, and the mortgage rate here. It will show your mortgage repayments. The average mortgage rate in Australia was 4%, and we will lock that in for 2 years. Here's our monthly mortgage repayments. These are related to owning a house, so this is our monthly house repayment. I'll keep that in the corner so we don't forget. So 2020 rolls by and it's time to update our mortgage. Whoa! I can get my fixed loan down to 2% now. That's awesome. I might just fix this for 3 years. Look how much my repayments have dropped. We've got an extra $700 a month now, and since we're in lockdown, we're saving on fuel by working from home, and I can't spend money on expensive trips overseas. We've got so much more to spend on other stuff now. Oh my goodness. Okay, it's 2023. Our fixed loan has expired and jumped from 2% to 6%. So compared to 2018, to pay for the house, we have to find an extra $890 a month, which is more than $200 per week. On top of the fact that food costs more, fuel costs more, just about everything costs more. And when we take a look at the average savings of an average Australian, those under 45 are feeling the pinch. Those extra repayments are going to completely devour a lot of people's savings. And because of the recent high inflation, real wages in Australia are at levels not seen since 2009. So how are house prices in Melbourne, Australia, going to continue to go up? China's spending? Well, as of 2023, China's economy looks a bit shaky to say the least. Not great, considering China is by far the largest purchaser of Australia's stuff. Try again. Maybe the government will do something to prop up house prices? They're trying. 2023 introduces the First Home Guarantee Scheme policy, which allows new buyers to purchase a home with only a 5% deposit. Don't know how well a 95% mortgage will go while interest rates are so high, but anyway, maybe the Housing Australia Future Fund might do it. But remember where our government gets their funds from. What's that I hear? Oh, back in 1990, I had to pay 17% interest on my mortgage. You only have to pay 6%. Yes, and how big was that mortgage? $100,000? Your repayments were likely $1,400 a month, whereas we are at $4,000 a month at the moment. Plus, personal debt was down here back then. Now it's up there, which makes the recent rate of change in interest in such a small amount of time substantial. Yes, cry me a river. A further complication is that government spending will be impacted by negative gearing, particularly the rise in interest rates. They have to give more money back, which means less to spend on their programs. So if they don't cut their spending, then they need more tax money. That's from you. And it's already started. 2023 introduces a new land tax on investment properties where a property worth $300,000 comes with an annual tax of $1,350 a year. Or if they have $10 million worth of properties, but these are if the properties are occupied. This is if they are not. A short-term rental tax is also being introduced, adding to the existing time bomb in the residential real estate space. But what about the record immigration numbers into Australia? Those migrants will be fine if they can find work. Maybe unemployment will remain at record low levels too. We can only hope. But how do we know a policy such as negative gearing rises demand which raises prices? Well, Australia's neighbours, New Zealand, had the same policy from 1991. But then abolished the policy in 2021, which led to a heavy fall in house prices. I'm not saying that's a right or wrong decision, them just the facts. And so the facts are, there is resistance to Melbourne house prices rising further in real terms. In fact, a price trend down has already started. This is especially important to remember given the majority of Australian property investors rely on negative gearing for their investment. They need prices up. I think there are 3 possible outcomes here. Number 1, Melbourne, Australia house prices continue on their merry way and continue to rise for now because the economy is good and the negative gearing policy is still in place among other government intervention policies. Number 2, the negative factors previously mentioned take effect and home prices fall, with no government intervention. Number 3, The negative factors previously mentioned take effect and home prices fall, so the government steps in to stop that from happening, which likely results in the Australian dollar losing value, making everything everyday Australians buy more expensive. And wait, what will be a sign that house prices will actually drop? Well, the drops have started with the rise of interest rates, but there are obviously thousands, if not millions, of cross currents that affect prices going up or down. You can look out for similar to what we have already gone through, but if you want just one to watch, keep an eye on unemployment rate. If unemployment climbs higher, even if it only gets to the historical average, this could be a loud indicator that home prices may fall. It's hard to pay a house off or buy a new house if you don't have a job. And to be clear, the unemployment rate can increase by 45% to reach the historical average. This may make it difficult for the new migrants to find work. I personally think it's going to be difficult for Melbourne home prices to continue going up in real terms, especially when you consider as of 2023, you could simply earn interest on your cash and get a much greater return and less stress compared to buying an investment property. What we have learned in this video can be applicable to you wherever you are in the world. Not saying that it's the same where you are, but we can think about how economics and introduce policies can affect our ability to buy a home, because home prices having a big move up or moving down is not guaranteed. The majority of voices aren't always right. Don't feel compelled to act because you feel you're going to miss out. This can lead to disaster when risks are high. Just know the costs. If you feel like you can't buy now, that's okay, because it's very expensive. The trend in prices is already beginning to head lower, and based on what we've gone through. Who knows, it might get cheaper. But at the end of the day, all you can do is know what you can afford, keep calm, stay humble, and be kind, even behind closed doors.